Hello, you're watching Race to Power. I'm Shreya Upadhyay. Tonight, we break down for you the Iran-America talks and where they might be headed. I'll be joined by a very special guest, Donald Trump's former National Security Advisor, Ambassador John Bolton. We're also talking about Hungary. The country is going to polls on the 12th of April, and ahead of that, we're getting you the pulse of the people and who has the edge between Viktor Orban and Peter Magyar. But first, let's talk about the Iran war. The countdown to the critical talks between America and Iran in Pakistan has now begun, but these negotiations are already shrouded in confusion and contradictions. There are several sticking points which have already emerged ahead of the direct talks between the two sides. First, the 10-point proposal from Iran's side has already stirred controversy. Remember, after Washington said that the plan shared with them varies from the one being publicly reported. However, Iran maintains that the United States has agreed in principle to their proposal as a foundation for the talks. Among the specific issues to be discussed, Iran's nuclear enrichment, that's a major sticking point. Remember, Tehran remains defiant on enriching uranium for civilian purposes. But the US has repeatedly accused Iran of racing to develop a nuclear weapon. And at the center of these accusations is an estimated 440 kilograms of highly enriched uranium that Iran possesses. The next sticking point, control over the Strait of Hormuz. That will be another contentious issue in these talks. The American president has accused Iran of obstructing global oil shipments and threatening maritime trade. However, Iran's leadership has defended its actions as a legitimate exercise of sovereign rights. And more recently, remember, Trump had said that a joint venture between both the countries can be negotiated, with Washington also eyeing a share in Tehran's plan of tolling the vessels that pass through the maritime passage. Another major point of discussion is Iran's demand of possible security guarantees from the US that no such attacks will take place in the future. Now, how the American delegation responds to this will determine the direction that these so-called peace talks take. The negotiations on Saturday will be just the first round, remember, which will set the tone for any further talks in the near future. World leaders watch this critical moment closely and with bated breath as the clock also ticks on a fragile 14-day ceasefire. And joining me live today on WION is Ambassador John Bolton, former Assistant to the President for National Security Affairs and the former United States Ambassador to the United Nations. Ambassador Bolton, thank you very much for speaking with us on WION. Donald Trump has just posted a short while back that there's going to be the world's biggest reset. We're just a short while. We're a few hours away from these talks in Pakistan. I want to start by asking you what your expectations are from these talks.
Well, I think Trump is clearly looking for any way he can to get out of the war against Iran, and he's doing so because he has obviously seen the price of oil go up, seen the price of stocks go down, and that matters to him more than the strategic issues. He's tried to declare victory in several ways. He's tried to declare all military objectives have been met. He's said that we have changed the regime in Iran, even though we haven't. So I think the Iranian negotiators are going to see that Trump is worried about his own political prospects. It'll give them a significant advantage. The real question is, how many concessions does Vice President Vance make before it looks even worse politically for Trump to cave into some of these Iranian demands? And I think it's very much up in the air what comes next.
Ambassador Bolton, you talked about Vice President Vance as well as concessions. Let me begin with Vice President Vance. How do you see J.D. Vance leading the American delegation? What sort of an impact does it have domestically as well as globally, considering the fact that he's one of the few in the Trump cabinet who were not really in support of this aggression against Iran?
Well, that's certainly true by all public accounts. And we also know that Iran asked that Vance be the head of the U.S. delegation, which is really pretty remarkable when you think about it, even more remarkable that Trump agreed to it. Moreover, I'm not aware off the top of my head of any other significant international negotiation that a vice president has actually headed. This is very unusual to say the least. Because the vice president, by definition, is the next best thing to the president himself. And that's not who the Iranians are heading their delegation with. It could be the Speaker of their parliament, but really, unless you're in the Revolutionary Guard, you're not a top official of this government. And I think it puts Vance and Trump in a very difficult position, because if Vance does make a significant number of concessions, and we can discuss what those might be. But if it looks like he's trying to give away points in order to get some declaration that the Strait of Hormuz is open, or some declaration that Iran will not seek nuclear weapons, which they have happily done for the past 35 years and then ignored them, I think that could be real political downside for both Vance and Trump.
Ambassador, one of the biggest sticking points, as you said, has been nuclear weapons. Uranium enrichment is something that both sides have been talking about. But Iran says that it's only for civilian use. Do you see that as a justified reason for them to actually develop nuclear arms, nuclear energy?
Well, I think that's the excuse that many would-be proliferators around the world have used over time. And the other steps that Iran has taken to weaponize highly enriched uranium, I think convincingly prove that nuclear weapons are the real objective. And that's in part why they've got the advanced ballistic missile system they do, and a variety of other things. For all the behavior that Iran has shown, particularly now reaching to try and cut off commercial shipments through the Strait of Hormuz, according to centuries of tradition and international practice, that it's a narrow waterway fully open to the free maritime traffic of any commercial vessel, is a radical departure. And just think how their behavior would be if they had nuclear weapons too.
All right, Ambassador Bolton, this is something that supporters of Iran say, that look, you might say that they will use it as an excuse and they will eventually, use nuclear weapons against the United States, but they haven't done it so far. Then why is there so much fear about Iran using those nuclear weapons? Because so far, every time America has attacked or had any sort of aggressive action against Iran, it's only justified it by saying that, look, they will use nuclear weapons against us and these are preemptive strikes.
Well, I think we're justified in doing that. They have, for 47 years, been calling America the Great Satan. And one of the first things their regime did in 1979 was take American diplomats hostage in Tehran for 444 days. If people are interested in international law, that's the first signal that the regime of the Ayatollahs sent as to exactly what they think of international law and what their compliance with it will be. So I don't take any of their excuses at face value. And I think the fact that we know they were an eager customer of A.Q. Khan of Pakistan, one of the world's great nuclear proliferation entrepreneurs, buying from him things like the designs for centrifuges that A.Q. Khan stole from a European company when he worked for them, and quite possibly selling the design of nuclear weapons that Pakistan had gotten from China. We know, for example, A.Q. Khan sold nuclear weapons designs to Muammar Gaddafi in Libya, and when Gaddafi gave up his nuclear weapons program, we got hold of those nuclear weapons designs, and they're in Chinese. So this connection, the same connection Pakistan has with North Korea and its nuclear weapons program, It shows what the Iranian objective is, I think, quite clearly, notwithstanding their public denials.
Ambassador Bolton, it's interesting that you talk about Pakistan and China, but I'm going to come back to that a bit later. I want to first talk to you about the Strait of Hormuz. That control still remains in the gray area. Donald Trump has, of course, said that a joint control can't be ruled out. But how do you see that panning out? Because Iran has reinstated and reiterated its control on the strait.
Well, I don't really think they have control. They have the power of intimidation at this point. They have obviously, by striking neutral commercial vessels in the Gulf during the course of the war, they've shown they're prepared to use military force against free commerce through the Gulf and through the Strait. I think that can be eliminated militarily. I think it's something, obviously, the U.S. has been concerned about. Since 1945, we've been concerned that no power outside the region or inside the region controlled all production of oil coming out of the Gulf area. So there are plans that could be activated. I'm sure in part they have been activated to make sure that neither Iran nor anybody else takes control of that narrow passage of water. And I just think it's unacceptable, given the precedent it would set for other countries that happen to be in that geographical position to do the same kind of thing. The Houthis in Yemen have tried to close the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, the connection between the Red Sea and the Indian Ocean. That's unacceptable too. So there's a lot at stake here. If you believe in freedom of the seas, what Iran is doing is a gross violation of those norms. And people say they want a rules-based international order. Well, good luck with that. But here's a rule. This is a rule that goes back thousands of years in its development.
But Ambassador Bolton, that's the same argument that supporters of Iran give. They say that, look, there's an international law, there's an international guideline, which Israel and America have violated, number one. And number two, if you say that Iran doesn't really have direct authority on the Strait of Hormuz, what was making Donald Trump so frustrated that he even ended up using abusive words in his post and, reflected the kind of frustration that he had?
Well, I think the U.S. and Israeli action was complying with international norms. We pointed out in the national security strategy in the George W. Bush administration that a country is entitled to take preventive steps against a hostile country's effort to build nuclear, chemical, or biological weapons, weapons of mass destruction. You don't have to wait until the last possible moment when your innocent civilian population is threatened. So it's Iran that's the aggressor here in all material respects. And the reason Trump is in a panic is because of high gasoline prices at the pump and the political damage he thinks he's suffering in the United States. It's not a strategic issue. And I think the concessions that Vice President Vance may be about to make in these talks aren't from a strategic perspective either, but to protect Trump's domestic political base.
Okay. Let me also then ask you, Ambassador Bolton, about how Pakistan's role is being seen in this. Some say that it was just, relaying messages between both parties. Pakistan chooses to portray itself as the big mediator, the big peacemaker in this conflict. Then there was Donald Trump, the American president, who said that, look, it was China who actually got Iran onto the negotiating table. How do you see this?
Well, I think this whole affair has been very confused, to say the least. We've got a fundamental disagreement between the U.S. and Israel on the one hand and Pakistan and Iran on the other, whether the truce covers Lebanon or not. The U.S. President and Vice President and the Israeli Prime Minister have said unequivocally they did not understand Lebanon to be covered. Pakistan and Iran have said differently. When you can't agree on a pretty important point like that, that tells you something about the nature of the so-called ceasefire agreement. And I think that kind of ambiguity could well have a major negative impact on the talks that could begin tomorrow in Pakistan.
All right. Do you see any sort of positive signals coming out of this meeting, Ambassador Bolton? Before I let you go, I just want to get a sense of how you're seeing these last few hours.
Well, I think it's going to remain confused, but I come back to my central point. I think Trump wants out for domestic political reasons. I think Iran sees panic, and I think they'll try and take advantage of it.
All right, all right. I'm going to leave it there. Ambassador John Bolton, thank you very much for speaking with us on WION and sharing your perspective.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
All right, let's shift our focus now. In a rare meeting, the Chinese President Xi Jinping hosted Taiwan's main opposition party leader in Beijing. Cheng Li-wun is the KMT's first sitting leader to visit China in a decade. Xi and Cheng shook hands in front of journalists at Beijing's Great Hall of the People, where Chinese leaders have traditionally received high-profile guests. Both the leaders stated their opposition to Taiwan's independence and expressed a desire for a peaceful resolution to the long-running dispute over the island's future.
The world today is far from peaceful, and peace is all the more precious for it. People on both sides of the strait are all Chinese, members of the same family. The shared aspiration is for peace, development, exchange, and cooperation. The meeting is precisely to safeguard the peace and stability of our common home.
Xi Jinping said that he's willing to work with all political parties in Taiwan to foster peaceful relations. But Beijing has refused to hold formal dialogue with the Taiwanese president, Lai Ching-te, whom he has labeled as a separatist. Lai has repeatedly committed to maintaining the status quo in cross-strait relations. But remember, Chinese authorities and the state media have heaped bitter rhetoric against him, calling him a troublemaker and a warmonger. Cheng, in her public remarks, has called a peace mission to reduce tensions at a time when Beijing has stepped up military pressure against the island territory. She in fact highlighted that we cannot allow Taiwan and the Taiwan Strait to descend into a battlefield.
To establish sustainable mechanisms for dialogue and cooperation so that the peaceful development of cross-strait relations becomes irreversible and all underlying causes of conflict are fundamentally eliminated.
2016, Beijing cut off high-level communication with Taiwan after the ruling Democratic Progressive Party's Tsai Ing-wen became president, citing her refusal to endorse the concept of a single Chinese nation. The DPP, remember, is among those who have criticized Cheng's trip, accusing her of being subservient to Beijing. This meeting comes ahead of a summit in Beijing with President Donald Trump, which is planned for May this year. Xi is likely to bring up his opposition to U.S. arms sales to Taiwan, which is a self-governing island that Beijing claims as its own territory, and in fact has refused to rule out taking it by force. The visit has triggered a reaction from the people of Taiwan as well, who have a divided view of this situation. Take a listen.
I think that this kind of interaction, whether it's with the United States or with China, if there truly is good interaction, then that is a good thing. We are ourselves. We shouldn't be especially leaning towards the United States or China. In my view, our relations with anyone shouldn't be overly close, nor overly bad.
I think the timing for Cheng's trip to China is extremely good, and that at a moment like this, when cross-strait relations are tense and dangerous, having an opposition party that can go to the mainland to visit is very favorable for the overall situation, and it also has a very good stabilizing effect on ordinary people, because relations across the Taiwan Strait simply won't work without communication. I think the timing for Cheng's trip to China is extremely good, and that at a moment like this, when cross-strait relations are tense and dangerous, having an opposition party that can go to the mainland to visit is very favorable for the overall situation, and it also has a very good stabilizing effect on ordinary people, because relations across the Taiwan Strait simply won't work without communication.
I hope there will be more and more exchanges between the two sides. We're like one family. We can go there, and they can come to the mainland. We are one family. We are all Chinese. That's how I see it.
一家人，我们都是中国人。 我是这么认为的。
Right, shifting our focus now, in less than 48 hours from now, voters in Hungary will cast their ballot in a critical parliamentary election. These polls on the 12th of April are shaping up to be the toughest challenge yet for the incumbent Prime Minister, Viktor Orban. The person making this battle difficult for Orban is his biggest political rival, Peter Magyar. The 45-year-old was once a part of Orban's party and the Prime Minister's ally. Peter is a lawyer turned political representative. The TISA party leader identifies himself as a conservative liberal and a pro-European lawmaker, but not without criticism for the bloc. Peter Magyar's political career, remember, began in the year 2002 when he joined Viktor Orban's Fidesz party, which at the time was in the opposition. Then in 2010, he became an official in the foreign ministry and soon went on to be a part of the Prime Minister's office. All was well until 2024, when Peter quit and joined a lesser-known TISA party. He then contested the EU Parliament elections and led several anti-government rallies against Orban. Through 2024 and 25, Peter Magyar emerged as Orban's main political rival and emerged as the TISA party's prime ministerial candidate for the April 12th election. The opposition leader is also a frontrunner across several opinion polls. Whether those surveys translate into a real victory, and will Hungary have a new prime minister after 16 long years? We'll find out next week. And our correspondent Pablo Gutierrez is joining us live from Budapest, Hungary. Let me understand from him what the pulse of the people is. Pablo, I want to start by understanding how people are looking at Peter Magyar. Opinion polls say that he is much ahead of Viktor Orban. But what is the status right now? Is that going to be translating into concrete votes in favor of him?
Well, the answer to the question, we will know it for sure on Sunday. What I can tell you right now is that Peter Magyar, since he announced his candidacy back in March 2024, has been predominantly leading in most independent opinion polls. And actually, there is some polling from some groups aligned with the government that show him ahead. But right now, the average, it's a double-digit lead for Peter Magyar. Now, you mentioned a little bit in your introduction about who he is, right? But I can tell you that before 2024, most Hungarians did not know the name Peter Magyar. His name really, and he rose to national prominence after a scandal that shook Fidesz and Orban's government. That was when the accusations, the scandal that broke out after the president, Kathleen Novak of this country, it was revealed that she accused, that she pardoned a man who had been found guilty of protecting pedophiles in a school, in a children's home here in Budapest. Now, Magyar was married at that time to the then Minister of Justice, Judith Varga. And after this scandal, Magyar broke with the party. He came out and criticized Orban. And then this is when he rose to and captured the attention and the imagination, let's say that, of the Hungarian people. It wasn't until the elections, the European elections, when Magyar and his TISA party got about 30% of the vote. That was in 2024. That was the first time since 2006 that a political party here in Hungary got 30% of the vote in a European parliamentary election.
Okay.
And that moment actually cemented the TISA party and Peter Magyar not only as a French movement or as a rising star, but an actual political force here in Hungary. So his rise comes from this pedophile scandal that shook the Orban government, and then it basically continues because of Hungary's economy, because of the satisfaction by the Hungarian people for the quality of services or the lack of quality of some of the services here. I'm
Okay.
talking about healthcare, education, railroads, and so on. So this is basically what's bringing us to this moment in history right now, where
All right.
Peter Mayer is looking at a window where he could take, possibly, if the polls predicted, Orban out of power after 16 years.
All right, so a plethora of issues that Hungarians are looking at to be resolved. We'll have to wait and see whether, that is translated into concrete votes as far as Peter Magyar is concerned. I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Pablo, for joining us and getting us a sense from Hungary. All right, with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Race to Power. But as always, we will keep getting you news and analysis from across the world. Thank you very much for joining us at the moment. Bye-bye.
Get the latest updates.
Destroy their
Breaking
missiles
news.
and raise their...
Credible, clear, continuous. Experts across aisles. Diverse voices, one platform. WION World is one.
Campaigns, elections, alliances, controversies, and power play. Stories that analyze global and domestic politics. A dedicated show with varied perspectives, expert take, citizens' voices, detailed ground reports, and in-depth coverage from political corridors of the world. This is Race to Power, only on WION.
So, I met an alien.
As Project Hail Mary continues to wreak havoc at ticket windows, we take a look at other blockbuster films inspired from books.
आज एंट्री नहीं, धमाकेदार एंट्रेंस होगा.
Meet actors Ravi Kishan and Kusha Kapila as they talk about Mamla Legal Hai Season 2. And know all about Alcatraz depiction in pop culture. All this and much more with me, Diksha Bisla, on WION in these times.
5 states, one powerful voice.
From Tamil Nadu to West Bengal.
Kerala to Assam. Every vote shapes the future. Get the election pulse only on WION.
will.i.am unveils a futuristic trike. Cleopatra's World brought back to life. Apple just turned 50 in the blink of an eye. Stop doom scrolling lest life pass you by. All these stories and more coming up on this episode of Tech It Out at these times.
The stress of our world can take a toll on our physical and emotional health. Here, in New York's Catskill Mountains, lies a luxurious place of healing called WION Wellness Center. The WION Wellness Center provides 500,000 square feet of natural methods to manage diabetes, hypertension, chronic pain, obesity, depression, anxiety, and other conditions. We use the traditions of centuries-old natural science from India, yoga, Ayurveda,